So a very good morning to all who have logged in. I know these days, without the mention of a pandemic, we don't initiate any process, whether it's online or offline. So I hope all of you are fine and doing safe. A warm welcome to especially the first year BDS students, who started off the course so enthusiastically, but had to, I would say, not to drop out, but they got a break in between because of this pandemic. So many of you lost in touch with the basics. So with all that in mind, Elsevier has come up with a brilliant plan of rejuvenating your minds by refreshing with some basics of important chapters like oral mucous membrane, which is important from your exam point of view. So at the outset, I take this opportunity to thank Elsevier and their team, Ms. Sumita, Ms. Shruti, Ms. Priyanka, and Ms. Kritika in helping me organize the seminar. So a little about myself. I completed my BDS in the year 2008 and went on to do my post-graduation in oral pathology and microbiology from the year 2009 to 12. And I recently completed my PhD. So I have a passion for teaching. And with that in mind, we thought, why not do a basic webinar to ignite the minds of the first year BDS students so that they don't lose touch with the ongoing academic process. So with that brief introduction, let me start this webinar. So these will be the intended learning outcomes. So after this session is completed, the students would have acquired knowledge about the organization and histomorphology of the oral mucous membrane. The students will be able to comprehend the functions and clinical aspects of the oral mucous membrane and mainly obtain a foundation and have an exam preparedness related to this topic on oral mucous membrane. So I'll be covering all these contents from introduction to its classification, the development. I'll be emphasizing on the structure and its organization, which is so important to know. Its histomorphology, very important from your practicals point of view. And the specialized mucosa, which is very unique. Then something about the non-keratinocytes, the functions of the oral mucous membrane, its applied aspects, clinical considerations, and the FAQs and the exam corner, which I'm sure most students would be interested to know. So the oral mucous membrane is a lining that covers the body cavities and it communicates with the external surface. And it is a moist lining and it connects the internal cavity with that of the exterior. So basically the oral mucous membrane is a lining and it forms a part of the digestive tract. And it consists of two basic components, that is an overlying epithelium and the underlying connective tissue. So it is derived from many layers, that is, you would have read in your embryology, that there are three layers, that is the ectoderm, mesoderm, and the endoderm. So the ectoderm forms the epithelial part of the skin and the oral mucosa, which we'll be dealing with in detail. And the endoderm forms the epithelial lining of the digestive tract. And the mesoderm forms the lining of the peritoneal cavity. So we are all well versed with tooth development and formation of the stomatodium and things like that. But how about the oral mucous membrane? So this starts at about the 7th week of intrauterine life when you have the lingual mucosa and formation of the circumvallate and foliate papillae. About 8 to 11 weeks, you have the palatal shelves that rise and close, separating the nasal and the oral cavity, and you have thickening of the masticatory and lining mucosa, which happens about 10 to 11 weeks. So by the 20th week, you see the layers of the oral mucous membrane that are well developed, and you'll be able to differentiate between the layers. So that is about the overlying overlying epithelium. How about the connective tissue? So it's the reticular fibers that appear first and start accumulating by the 6th to 8th week of intrauterine life. And then you have capillary buds and collagen fibers that appear by 8 to 12 weeks. So slowly these collagen fibers increase in number and form collagen bundles. So this is an important aspect from your Viva Voce point of view, where you're always asked to classify oral mucous membrane. So you should always mention based on what you're classifying them. So based on function, we have masticatory mucosa, lining mucosa, and specialized mucosa. So you should understand the main difference between the masticatory mucosa and the others is that the masticatory mucosa is tightly bound to bone, that is the gingiva and the hard palate, whereas the lining mucosa, like the name says, it's just lining. It's very much flexible in contrast to the masticatory mucosa. You also have specialized mucosa, which have some unique functions, either in the form of an attachment or like the taste buds, where there is a specialized function, which the other two mucosae don't have. So this is based on function. Based on keratinization, you have orthokeratinized, parakeratinized, and non-keratinized. So there are some subtle differences between orthokeratinized and parakeratinized, which we'll be covering in the histomorphology. So these are the two main broad classifications that you should know. So how is the oral mucosa different from the skin? So you'll be knowing the color is different, the surface is moist, and you know there is absence of adnexal structures. So by adnexal structures, I mean hair follicles, sebaceous glands, sweat glands, and so on. However, we do get sebaceous glands sometimes, pretty rare, in the oral cavity. Those are called as Fordyce spots or Fordyce granules. Then in the oral cavity, you have presence of the minor salivary glands. Those are absent on the skin. The texture is completely different if you compare the oral mucosa and that of the skin, mainly because of the hair follicles and the increased amount of keratinization that you have on the skin. And the firmness also varies. So these are the main differences. So you see, in this slide, you can see the difference between the oral mucous membrane under the microscope, which is very much smooth compared to the surface of the skin, which is more keratinized, and you can see several adnexal structures like hair follicles and sebaceous glands, which are otherwise absent in the oral mucous membrane. So how is it organized and what is the structure? So broadly, you have keratinized and non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium, and you have a basement membrane that demarcates or divides the epithelium from the underlying connective tissue. The interface between the epithelium and connective tissue is not always flat. You have downward projections of epithelium called as rete ridges, and you have upward projection of the connective tissue that is termed as the connective tissue papillae. So please remember, the connective tissue, the most superficial part, is called as a lamina propria, and the deeper part is referred to as the submucosa. So this is how it is. You have a superficial layer, that is the epithelium, which is composed of 4 layers. And these are the rete ridges shown in the schematic. You can appreciate the same in the photomicrograph also. These are the rete ridges, which project downward. From the connective tissue, you have upward projections, which are called as the connective tissue papillae. And the lamina propria makes the superficial part of the connective tissue, which is further divided into the papillary layer and the reticular layer. And then you have the submucosa, which is composed of fat, muscle fibers, bone, and so on. You have some minor salivary glands also, as you can see in this photomicrograph. In contrast, you see the skin highly keratinized and the presence of multiple adnexal structures like sweat glands and so on, and hair follicles too. This is a schematic to help the student understand the difference between the varying type of mucosa and the gastrointestinal tract. That is the digestive system. So right from the oral cavity, if you see, you have an overlying epithelium with rete ridges, you have the lamina propria, which is very well demarcated into a reticular portion. And then you have the submucosa, you have a periosteum, and then the bone. If you see the intestinal mucosa, you see it is in total contrast. You have the epithelium thrown into folds and projections for better absorption mainly. And you have a very thick submucosa. And instead of a periosteum, you have the muscle layers, which help in peristalsis. So very much in contrast to the oral mucoperiosteum, what we usually see in the masticatory mucosa, you can observe that there is no submucosa here. Instead, you have very thickened amount of collagen fibers, which tightly adhere the overlying epithelium to the underlying periosteum and the bone. So that is a major difference. So we'll see how this has an implication in the clinical aspect. So in the connective tissue, you see salivary glands, sebaceous glands, and lymphoid follicles. How are all these cells adherent to each other? The cells of the oral mucous membrane. I just told you you have 4 layers and a multitude of cells. So you have 3 types of junctions called as tight junctions, like the ones you see between 2 epithelial cells, or this epithelial cell is referred to as a keratinocyte. So this tight junction acts as a barrier and regulates the movement of water and solutes between the epithelial layers. You also have these gap junctions. They allow for direct chemical communication and transfusion or diffusion of components with also the extracellular fluid. You also have what is called as macular adherents, or the desmosome, which are very important adhesion molecules which hold either 2 cells together, or they hold 1 cell and the lamina propria. That's when we call them as a hemidesmosome. So these are the cell junctions. This is an ultrastructure of the basement membrane, where in the schematic you can see how the hemidesmosomes are placed. Like the name says, hemi, so you see these semicircular structures which connect the overlying epithelium and the underlying connective tissue. So these are called as macular adherents. You can see they are very well anchored intracellularly by tonofibrils, which are made up of collagen fibers. So another important concept when it comes to oral mucous membrane is that the student has to understand what is epithelial maturation and what is turnover rate. So epithelial maturation is the time taken for the basal layer to transcend through all the above 3 layers and then exfoliate into the oral cavity. And by turnover rate, we mean the time taken for all the layers to be replaced by new layers of cells. So you have a progenitor population present in the basal cell layer, which is constantly dividing and provides new cells, which constantly undergoes maturation as they travel towards the surface. So like I said, the estimated time necessary to replace all the cells in the epithelium is referred to as turnover time. So you'll understand what is the significance of this as we proceed through this webinar. You can see that I've compared some of the turnover times of different parts of the oral cavity and that of the skin. So it takes about 52 to 75 days for the layers of the epithelium of the skin, that is the epidermis, to complete a turnover, and about 4 to 14 days in the gastrointestinal tract, about 41 to 57 days in the gingiva, 20 to 25 days in the buccal mucosa, and just 4 to 6 days in the junctional epithelium. So this is very important because there are so many lesions that simultaneously involve the skin and the oral mucosa. Because of the high turnover rate of the oral mucous membrane, you will always see many of these lesions manifest first in the oral mucous membrane, in the oral cavity, and then you will see the manifestations of the skin. So many times, the dentist becomes the first person to diagnose several dermatologic lesions, several viral infections, because the lesions first present in the oral cavity because of its high turnover rate, and then it appears on the skin. So this really helps us in diagnosing lesions early, and it provides a better treatment plan or management for the patient. So these are some photomicrographs comparing the 2 types of keratinized squamous epithelium, that is orthokeratinized and parakeratinized and non-keratinized. So you see distinctly in the non-keratinized epithelium, you don't have the superficial stratum corneum or the keratinized layer. Instead, you have what is called as stratum superficial, and also the granular cell layer is missing in non-keratinized epithelium. If you see the difference between orthokeratinized and parakeratinized epithelium, you will notice that in parakeratinized epithelium, a small pycnotic nucleus has been retained, whereas in orthokeratinized, the pycnotic nucleus has been lost. So how do I differentiate? The student may ask, how do I differentiate if I don't see the most superficial layer? No problem. You see, when you notice the granular cell layer in orthokeratinized and parakeratinized epithelium, you can see the granular cell layer is very prominent in orthokeratinized epithelium, which is filled with granules called as keratohyalin granules, and that is not very distinct in parakeratinized epithelium. So this is one way of differentiating ortho and parakeratinized epithelium. So by keratinization, we mean this is a normal functional process of the keratinocyte. And once it matures, it deposits a layer of keratin called a stratum corneum, and it is filamentous in nature, containing proteins. So the keratinized epithelium consists of 4 layers, that is, from bottom onwards, you have stratum basale, stratum spinosum, stratum granulosum, and stratum corneum. So the stratum basale consists of cuboidal or columnar cells, and it anchors the epithelium to the connective tissue. You should remember that a component of the basement membrane, that is type 4 collagen, is also secreted by the stratum basale cells, apart from the fibroblast. Now, there are 2 main types of basal cells, that is the serrated type, which is adapted for attachment, and then you have the non-serrated type, which are proliferating stem cells, and they are very closely associated with melanocytes present in the basal layer of the epithelium. And then as we go up, we have what is called as stratum spinosum, because the edges are sharp and they appear as spiked. That is because they are joined by the intercellular bridges, and after processing, these ends stand out as sharp or spiny. So it's very active in protein synthesis, and you have something called as spherical granules or Odland bodies, which are present in this layer. So these Odland bodies are membrane coating granules, and basically they are glycoripid rich, and they prevent ingress of fluid, and they form a permeability barrier. So you can notice by the arrows pointed why stratum spinosum is called so, because of its prickle cell appearance. And these Odland bodies, like I told you, contribute to formation of an epidermal permeability barrier. They are about 200 to 300 nanometers in size. So I've told you the difference between parakeratinized and orthokeratinized epithelium. So all the first BDS students who are attending, I hope the moment you see this photomicrograph, you will be able to tell whether it is orthokeratinized or parakeratinized, I hope. So it's very straightforward, and I'm sure most of you, I guess all of you, have correctly identified this as orthokeratinized epithelium for 2 reasons. One is because the keratin layer does not show you a pycnotic nucleus, and you can see how prominent the stratum granulosum is, which is filled with keratohyalin granules. I hope you remember this. So these keratohyalin granules, please remember from your Viva Voce point of view, it's very rich in filigrin and leucocrin. So then you have the most superficial layer in keratinized epithelium called as stratum corneum. So these are flat cells devoid of any nuclei or any other cell organelles, and they are fully packed with keratin filaments, which is coated by filigrin. And the cells desquamate from henceforth. And we have 2 types of keratinized epithelium, ortho and parakeratinized. So once again, I am constantly re-emphasizing on the difference between both. Okay, so in parakeratinized, you have the pycnotic nucleus, and in orthokeratinized, you do not have a pycnotic nucleus with a prominent granular cell layer. So how is the non-keratinized mucosa different from this keratinized layer? So, like I told you, the stratum granulosum is absent. The tonofilaments remain dispersed and less conspicuous. And the Odland bodies that form the glycolipid-rich permeability barrier are more round rather than oval. So you see, you have the stratum basale spinosum, and you don't have the granulosum. Instead, you have a stratum superficiale. So that is the difference in the Odland bodies in keratinized and non-keratinized. No great clinical significance as such why the size is different. It's just academic. So the stratum intermedium have larger cells than spinous cells, and the spinous layer is not very obvious. There are some intermediate filaments, and you should also remember the stratum superficiale have more flat cells and loosely arranged filaments in general, and very less or rather absent keratohyalin granules. So these are some of the major differences that you need to know between keratinized and non-keratinized mucosa. So this is the non-keratinized or lining mucosa. So I told you in the earlier slide, this is also called as reflecting mucosa because it's very mobile and distendable. Please remember, under certain conditions like trauma or stress, this non-keratinized mucosa can also undergo keratinization. Okay. So the lining mucosa has a very loosely textured and adherent submucosa, because of which it allows easy movement of tissues. And it's usually pinkish or even red sometimes because of the underlying blood vessels that are present. And it is not at all significantly involved with mastication. It is not built for, a raw force or strength. However, these regions are important for speech and swallowing. So functionally, they are very important. And they have a very high level of elastic fibers within the lamina propria that makes it flexible. In contrast, the masticatory mucosa does not have a prominent submucosa, and you have thick collagen fibers that make it very much adherent to the underlying periosteum and the bone. The anterior part of the heart palate is composed of adipose tissue, in contrast to the posterolateral aspect, which is made up of minor salivary glands. That is something you have to remember. So if somebody shows you a photomicrograph like this and asks you, is this the anterolateral palate or the posterolateral palate? So I'm sure all of you would say this is the posterolateral palate. Why? Because you can see the minor salivary glands. Also, you have the gingiva, which is a major part of the masticatory mucosa. So you can see how beautifully the gingiva covers each tooth in a collar-like fashion, and it enhances the aesthetic appearance of the individual. So please remember, you have something called as a free gingiva or a marginal gingiva. So before we get into the parts of the gingiva, the masticatory mucosa can be both orthokeratinized and parakeratinized. Please remember that. So the gingiva surrounds the neck of the teeth in a collar-like fashion. And you have something called as the free or the marginal gingiva, which can be reflected with the periodontal probe. And this is separated by what is called as the free gingival groove from the attached gingiva. The attached gingiva continues, and then it unites with the mucogingival junction. The mucogingival junction separates the attached gingiva from the alveolar mucosa. And then between the teeth, you call that portion of the gingiva, which is triangular or tent-shaped, as interdental papilla. You also have a depression which lies between the facial and the lingual surface. And this portion of the gingiva is called as the caul or COL. So this is the histology of the gingiva: thin and long retages, a parakeratinized surface, an absent submucosa, and a tightly adhered periosteum. Here you can see the parts of the gingiva. If this is the free gingiva and this is the attached gingiva, see how it blends with the alveolar mucosa, and this would be the mucogingival junction. And this is the gingival caul, which connects the interdental papilla on the facial surface and the interdental papilla on the lingual surface. This is the caul. And in contrast to all parts of the gingiva, please remember, the caul is non-keratinized. So the significance is it is very, very vulnerable to inflammation. In case of food lodgement in between the teeth and so on, the caul can get inflamed and it can also get keratinized. So here we cannot ignore, and we have to acknowledge, what are the gingival group of fibers, the types of collagen fiber bundles that are present in the gingiva. So we have the main group that is called as dentogingival. You can see from the schematic here, it runs from the cementum and extends into the lamina propria of the gingiva. Then we have alveolo-gingival, which connects the alveolar bone to the cementum of the tooth. Runs from the alveolar crest again into the lamina propria. You have dentoperiosteal, which runs from the alveolar bone and connects to the cementum of the teeth. You can see some circular fibers in cross section Transseptal fibers are very important from orthodontic point of view, and they are mainly involved in causing relapse. So sometimes these transseptal fibers are even cut before the initiation of orthodontic treatment. We also have semicircular, vertical, and some other less important fibers like interdental and transgingival. So all these fibers reinforce the gingiva and help it surround the tooth and reinforce the strength again of the entire tooth and the periodontium. So these are some of the junctions we have. First is the mucocutaneous junction present between the lip and the cutaneous part of the face. And the mucogingival junction, I just told you, separates the attached gingiva from the alveolar mucosa. So here, once again, we can brush upon the parts of the gingiva. So this is the free gingiva, what I spoke to you about, which can be reflected using a periodontal probe. So you have something called as the gingival sulcus, which is lined by sulcular epithelium. Again, that is non-keratinized, please remember. Then you have the attached gingiva. The mucogingival junction separates this attached gingiva from the alveolar mucosa. So I hope it's very clear, the parts of the gingiva and the types of junctions. So what is this dentogingival junction and junctional epithelium? So the dentogingival junction is that unique location where the oral mucosa meets the surface of the tooth. It's a very important location, and it is also a weak spot because of microorganisms can do a lot of damage in this place, and it can cause formation of a periodontal pocket and even gingival recession, and the tooth can become mobile and even exfoliate. Okay. So the gingival sulcus in normal individuals is about 0.5 to 1.8 mm, and any depth more than 3 mm is considered pathologic, and it represents a periodontal pocket. So the floor of the sulcus, please remember, is made up by what is called as junctional epithelium, and this is in complete contact with the tooth, and we will discuss more about it and its significance. So I told you the gingiva is lined by sulcular epithelium, which is non-keratinized. So you can have a look at this. This is a schematic. So this is the tooth here on the left-hand side. You have the enamel and the cementum meeting at the cemento-enamel junction. So you see, this is the sulcular epithelium, which is non-keratinized. And you have the gingival sulcus. So this depth is usually 0.5 to 1.8 mm in normal individuals. And in pathologic conditions and diseases, this is going to increase. So this is the special junctional epithelium which connects the oral mucous membrane, that is the part of the gingiva, to the tooth surface. So how special it is, we will find out. So it is stratified non-keratinizing epithelium, which is attached by one broad surface, and on one side you have the tooth, and that is attached by a special internal basal lamina with an attachment, and you have another connective tissue surface made up of an external basal lamina. So this kind of a dual basal lamina attachment is very unique to the junctional epithelium, and it is also referred to as a specialized mucosa apart from the tongue. So the junctional epithelium is very much permeable, and it allows a passage of material, especially bacteria, from the sulcus into the connective tissue, which is very significant. So this is how the external and internal basal lamina look. You have an internal basal lamina and you have an external basal lamina too. And they are made up of, the cells are attached with each other through desmosomes, and we have hemidesmosomes present on the external basal lamina. So I would like to link this to the epithelial cell turnover in the gingiva. So I've told you it's just about 4 to 6 days. So that is how quickly the cells turn over in this region of the oral cavity. So let's dwell into what is called as specialized mucosa. So how special is the dorsal surface of the tongue? So very much special because of the presence of the papillae and the taste buds. So we see certain regions of the tongue are more specialized to perceive different tastes and enhance them. Like the most posterior aspect is going to enhance bitter, the lateral borders, the sour taste, the tip of the tongue, sweet, and again the anterior borders, the salty taste. So that is one explanation why when we take oral medication, we place the tablet somewhere here away from all these zones so that we don't taste its unacceptable taste. So we place it there in the middle. So the tongue is very obviously characterized by the presence of the papillae, that is filiform, fungiform, circumvallate, and foliate papillae. Foliate papillae are less in humans and more in chewing animals. So this is how the filiform papillae appears. You have multiple finger-like projections, and you have very thin fibrovascular connective tissue cores. So please remember one thing: the filiform papillae does not contain any taste buds. So it is covered by a thick keratinized epithelium, and it helps in stabilizing food. Very much it helps in masticatory action. So very much it helps in mastication. So please remember. And it also has a cleansing action. We have the fungiform papillae, which are round protuberances, mushroom shaped, and these contain the taste buds. Okay, they appear highly vascular, because of which they appear reddish. We also have circumvallate papillae. Now these are very few in number. They are about 10 to 12 in number, and they are just present anterior to the sulcus terminalis. Sulcus terminalis is that demarcation between the anterolateral aspect of the tongue and the posterolateral aspect of the tongue. So the lateral surface, like you can see in this photomicrograph here, contains plenty of taste buds. So what do we mean by a taste bud? So a taste bud is a barrel-shaped structure which is made up of mainly 4 types of cells. Okay, type 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you can see each type of cell plays an important role in determining a specific type of taste. The type 1 is called as glial cells because there is a nerve innervation too. Type 2 cells, or the dark cells, light cells, are important in analyzing the sweet type of taste. Type 3 mainly involved in tasting the bitter type. Type 4 cells are more of the stem cell type, and they can regenerate and form any of the types from 1 to 4. So please remember that. See, also remember the taste buds are not only present on the tongue, they are also present on the soft palate, epiglottis, larynx, and even the pharynx. Again, high power photomicrograph to show you the different types of cells present in the taste buds and their morphology. So we've been talking about the keratinocytes till now. How about the non-keratinocytes? What are these non-keratinocytes? So please don't get confused. The cells of the non-keratinized epithelium are also called as keratinocytes. Okay. Whether it is keratinized epithelium or non-keratinized epithelium, we call them as keratinocytes only. So what are non-keratinocytes? These are non-epithelial cells. So we'll see what they are. So mainly there are 4 types. So you can see in the schematic where they are located. We have melanocytes. You've all heard of melanocytes. They are neuroectodermal in origin, and they contain melanin pigment. There is a new type of cell, okay, Merkel cell. You see how the Merkel cell is present, and you see its attachment to the sensory nerve terminal. So I hope you're getting an idea what its function could be. We have Langerhans cell, okay, the Langerhans cell. So dear students, please don't get confused with Langhans cell. Okay, Langhans cell is a giant cell, which you'll be learning in physiology and even your second year general pathology, okay, which is completely different. It is a giant cell. We are talking about Langerhans cell. And then we have inflammatory cells. Okay. So these melanocytes are dendritic cells. Okay, they are neuroectodermal in origin. They are present only in the stratum basale. Please remember this. They are present in the stratum basale, and they have these kind of projections which are called as dendritic processes. Okay, which will transfer sometimes the melanin pigment which is present in them into the adjacent keratinocytes, something like this. So sometimes you will not be able to differentiate a melanocyte and a keratinocyte because even a keratinocyte will appear pigmented. Okay. Then the Merkel cell. Okay. It contains small membrane-bound vesicles. And this is mainly a mechanoreceptor. That is, it responds and it can sense the amount of pressure you're applying on the oral mucosa, mainly the masticatory pressure due to the food that you're applying. And it also helps in neurotransmission. So when you're chewing, you actually know how much pressure is falling on the soft tissues because of this Merkel cell, okay, which has a sensory function. Langerhans cells. So this is a immunohistochemical stain that is used to point out the Langerhans cells. They are very rich in Berber granules, okay. So mainly these are antigen processing or antigen presenting cells that will present the antigen, capture and present the antigen to the defense cells. That is the inflammatory cells, okay. I'm sure you're thorough with these, the neutrophils, eosinophils, lymphocytes, mast cells, okay. So these are the 4 types of non-keratinocytes that are present in the oral mucous membrane. How about the functions of the oral mucous membrane? Yes, it definitely helps you in protection. The thick layers that are present helps you protect the oral cavity from heat and cold, okay. You have protection from the ingress of microorganisms, okay. Then it is very well lubricated, which helps us in deglutition, that is swallowing, even in speech, okay. You need secretion from the minor salivary glands that are present on the surface of the oral mucous membrane, and this helps in formation of the bolus. Then the inflammatory cells play a major role in defense. We just spoke about the Langerhans cell and the inflammatory cells. So the mucous membrane acts as the first barrier to all the pathogens that enter the oral cavity. Then sensation, the nerve fibers that are present in the connective tissue, they help you elicit and analyze how hot or cold your food is. Otherwise, you'll have ulcers unnecessarily if you cannot determine that, which happens in certain sensory conditions. The patient is unaware how much of amount of hot or a cold drink or a food he's consuming, okay. Then permeability and absorption. You know how the floor of the mouth is lined by lining mucosa. Many drugs can be absorbed from here, okay. And absorption again of drugs. And even the gingival sulcus can excrete certain materials which we can analyze, through the saliva. A lot of things can be analyzed, okay. So these are all the major functions of the oral mucous membrane. How about the applied aspects and clinical considerations? So you have to remember that as the person ages, the mucosa will slowly atrophy and start to become thin, okay. So as the mucosa becomes thin, there will be some amount of intolerance to heat or cold or to spicy food, because even the blood vessels that are present in the lamina propria may tend to dilate, okay. So you can see from this picture here, mostly a denture wearer. So as the mucous membrane becomes very thin, and there will also be atrophy of some of the minor salivary glands that are present. So what happens? There is a decreased secretion of saliva, and there is a loss of lubrication too. So what happens? The person may develop some ulcers, okay, or like you can see in this picture, he's a constant denture wearer. So some erythematous areas and zones too, you are able to observe it. So these are some of the age changes that the oral mucosa can undergo. Let's have a look at the tongue here in this picture. So this doesn't look similar to the earlier picture of the tongue what I showed you all, isn't it? Because there you had all the papillae that were present. However, here, due to aging and many other conditions I would like to tell you about, like megaloblastic anemia or nutritional deficiencies, even vitamin deficiencies like B12 and folate deficiency, okay. You have loss of the papillae here, if you can notice, and see how the tongue becomes, it assumes a smooth, shiny and a varnished appearance, almost a bald tongue, okay. So this is something you'll have to keep in mind and remember, one of the applied aspects. As the person ages, you see how distended the veins become, the blood vessels, how they become. These are called as lingual varices, okay. something very similar to varicose veins that appear on the leg. You have a similar phenomenon happening in the oral cavity too, which is again a applied aspect. It can also be a physiological phenomenon that happens in the old age. Okay. So, like I told you, the atrophy of the major and minor salivary glands will result in xerostomia and leads to a secondary atrophy of the mucous membrane. So you can see how cracked the tongue appears, rough, cracked and pebbly in appearance. Okay. So I'm telling you all this because in your first year BDS, you are learning everything what is normal. And from your second year, and when you enter the clinics in third year, you should apply all what you have learned in first year into a translatory approach to the patient. Okay. Have a look at this second picture here. So what happens in chemotherapy or radiation therapy in an oral cancer patient? So high doses of chemotherapy and radiotherapy are given. So what happens? This is going to kill all the stem cells, or rather these doses of drugs and radiation is going to kill the cells which have a high turnover rate. Okay, rapidly dividing cells like the cancer cells are killed. In the process, also the cells that have a high turnover rate are killed. So the cells of the oral mucous membrane are prevented from undergoing maturation. The turnover is completely reduced. Because of this, there is stagnation of the layers of the oral mucous membrane, which ulcerate, and they lead to multiple ulcers in patients undergoing chemotherapy and radiotherapy. Okay, and again, continuing my discussion on reduced turnover rate, see, this is a patient who is suffering from psoriasis. So remember, I told you about different turnover rates, and I told you in the junctional epithelium, it's about 4 to 6 days. In psoriasis, the turnover rate is just 1 day. Can you imagine? In 1 day, the turnover happens, because of which, in case you have seen patients with psoriasis on their skin, you'll see a lot of these kind of scaly lesions. Okay, these scaly lesions are nothing but keratin and the exfoliated epithelial cells, which are exfoliating layer by layer within a day. Okay, so that is why you see these kind of scaly lesions. Okay, there are certain factors which affect the color of the mucosa. Please remember, mainly it is determined by the concentration and state of the size of the blood vessels and the number of blood vessels, the underlying connective tissue. Okay, that is the lamina propria, the thickness of the overlying epithelium. Okay, and the degree and amount of keratinization. Okay, please remember that for your viva voce. Okay, so I showed you some normal pictures of the gingiva. So you can see here what happens in inflammation when the gingiva becomes red. Okay, when it becomes erythematous and loses its normal pale pink color. Fine. So again, we can exploit the thin lining of the floor of the mouth, which is very permeable for drug delivery. Okay, or also some kind of drugs in the form of patches can be delivered. Okay, please remember that. In the palate, I told you that the mucosa is very much adherent due to a very scanty submucosa. Okay, so it is very tightly adherent. So this makes what? The palatine nerve blocks very challenging to deliver. Okay, so you will realize this when you come to third year. Okay, so please remember these aspects and have a translational approach. Whatever you learn in theory, make sure you translate it by the chair side and put it into application. The stippling of the gingiva, which is due to the traction of the collagen fibers. I spoke to you about the gingival group of fibers, isn't it? Due to their constant pulling and because of the projections of the interdental papillae, okay, the connective tissue papillae, you have something called as stippling, which resembles the exterior surface of an orange peel. So you see the picture on the right. In gingivitis, when there is inflammation, this stippling is lost. Okay, so please remember all these clinical aspects. So, dear students, I hope you had a comprehensive session on all aspects of the oral mucous membrane. I hope this will really help you from your exam point of view. Also, I've collated some questions from different universities of the country, and I've seen that these are some of the questions that have repeated regardless of whichever university you're studying in. Okay. So usually the main questions for 10 marks, they usually ask you to classify the oral mucous membrane, and they ask you to discuss in detail the layers of keratinized mucosa, or they ask you to compare keratinized and non-keratinized mucosa, or they ask you in detail about specialized mucosa. So please be prepared for these. Then for 5 marks, you can always get gingival group of fibers, dentogingival junction, junctional epithelium, histology of the lingual papillae and the taste buds, okay, and applied aspects of oral mucous membrane, what we last discussed, okay. And as a 3 marker, you can also get histology of taste buds and functions of oral mucous membrane, and the non-keratinocytes also are very important for you to know, okay. And for the 10 markers and 5 markers, please draw sufficient amount of diagrams. It's very important, okay. So I hope the intended learning outcomes of this webinar were satisfied, dear students. I hope you've gained sufficient knowledge on the structure, morphology, clinical aspects, clinical considerations, and applied aspects. I hope now you are exam prepared and ready to answer any question, either it is from your theory exam, whether it is your practical exam, or your viva was from the oral mucous membrane. Okay. It was my absolute pleasure today to devote this time and speak to the first BDS students of our country. Okay. So once again, I take this opportunity to thank Elsevier for giving me this platform. I humbly thank Ms. Sumita, who has worked so hard to make this webinar happen, and also Ms. Shweta, Ms. Priyanka, and Ms. Kritika, who are all part of the organizing team of Elsevier. And most importantly, I thank the faculty, the HODs, and the dearest first year BDS students who have attended this webinar. I also thank my Dean, Professor Srinivas Murthy, and my HOD, Dr. Soumya, who supported me in delivering this webinar.
Thank you so much, Dr. Augustine. It was really a pleasure to host this webinar. Dr. Augustine, we have a few questions from the students.
Yes,
so can you just get onto the Q&A tab and take up the questions?
Yes, 1 minute. So Sai Pranavi has asked me, what is junctional epithelium? So anyway, it's a very direct question. I suggest you read it up from the book. I'll tell you. So it is that part where the oral mucosa contacts the tooth, okay? And junctional epithelium is also considered as specialized because it has an internal and external basal lamina, and it forms a very unique type of attachment of the soft tissue and the hard tissue, okay? Sai Pranavi. So it is very vulnerable to attack from bacteria. That is what you have to remember. That is why the gingival sulcus has to be kept free from bacteria and pathogens. Okay, so someone has asked me Divya Bagal. So free gingiva and attached gingiva, they've asked me to tell the exact difference. See, free gingiva is mobile. Like I told you, you can insert a periodontal probe into the gingival sulcus and retract it back. Whereas the attached gingiva is adherent to the periosteum. Okay, the attached gingiva is divided from the free gingiva by the free gingival groove. Okay. So Dinesh Shankar has asked me which part of the tongue umami taste is felt. See, this is a new term, umami, that is used to describe something that is in between sweet and salt. Okay. So mainly it is felt on the lateral borders, and the type 2 cell, okay, the type 2 cell of the taste bud plays a role in eliciting this taste. Again, many students have asked about junctional epithelium. So, so I've explained about junctional epithelium, that it is a specialized mucosa which is non-keratinized, and it adheres the oral mucous membrane to the hard tissue, that is the tooth. It is specialized because it is made up of 2 types of lamina, an internal lamina and an external lamina for attachment on either side. It's very permeable, it has a very high turnover rate, and it is very significant because maximum amount of passage of bacteria can happen from the junctional epithelium into the gingival mucosa. So we have to keep this very hygienic and clean. Okay, I hope I've explained a lot about junctional epithelium. The answer is in front of you, the books that you can see. Okay, Aubin's oral histology, Tenkate's oral histology, and the Atlas of oral histology. Okay, so if you can spend some time and go through in detail, you will have a very sound foundation of not only junctional epithelium, but also the entire oral mucous membrane. So Asta Gupta has asked me, how can we treat fissured tongue? See, please remember, when you use the word fissured tongue, we have to first determine whether it is syndromic or non-syndromic. Okay. See, you get fissured tongue in certain syndromes like Melkersson-Rosenthal syndrome. So there the treatment is only symptomatic. Okay, you cannot rather treat it. When you're talking about fissured tongue, which may be secondary due to xerostomia, you can definitely treat xerostomia by first taking a scan of the major salivary glands. If there is a silolith, okay, you can extract this silolith, and you can make the salivary ducts more patent. You can open them up, okay, through a investigative silographic procedure by injecting some dyes. This will ensure there is sufficient salivary flow. Okay, this is one way to treat the tongue which has developed fissures due to xerostomia. Now, on the other side, if there is some kind of a neurological deficit, and because of that there is xerostomia, you have to treat the underlying neurological condition, okay, by use of probably some anticholinergics. Okay. So Shriya has asked me, is it possible to reduce the turnover rate to reduce the conditions like psoriasis? It is not possible. See, rather than treating the symptom, we have to always treat the root cause. So you have to treat the root cause of psoriasis, okay, through the use of topical steroids, immunomodulatory drugs. Okay, so you have to treat the psoriasis. Once psoriasis is treated, automatically the turnover rate becomes normal. Okay. So Akansha has asked me, what if the color of the gingiva becomes brown? It can happen. Okay, brown or even black. It can happen when the person is a chronic smoker. Okay, the constant heat generated and the hydrocarbons that are generated from cigarette smoke can stimulate the melanocytes that we spoke about, the non-keratinocyte. Okay, so the melanocytes can increase in number, and they can produce more amount of melanin, and this can make the gingiva brown. Okay, so again, the person has to either start smoking, or you can treat it by lasers also. Many times the color of the gingiva depends on the race of the individual. Okay, even though we say the gingiva is coral pink in color, you will not see that in Indians. It is coral pink in Caucasians and Europeans. Okay, in Indians or Asians, the color of the gingiva is pink with physiologic pigmentation. Okay. So another question from Vijay Lakshmi is, if a person is suffering from macrodontia, is that curable at the age of 25? Definitely it is curable by an aesthetic procedure. First, we'll have to take a radiograph and see the location of the pulp chamber. Okay, and then the tooth can be prepared with an aerator and a crown can be given to the patient. So definitely it is treatable. So Arundhati Mahato has asked a very interesting question, I would say. I think she is very much in touch and in trend with the ongoing pandemic. And she asks, how is mucormycosis affecting the oral mucous membrane? That's a very good question. See, please remember, there is something called as the home microorganisms, or in technical terms, it's called as the normal common cells of the oral mucosa. Bacteria, the normal bacteria, which comprises the normal flora of the oral mucous membrane that is present in the oral cavity. Okay. If you are constantly on high doses and long duration of antibiotics or steroids, you are going to destroy the normal flora of the oral cavity. Okay. So what happens when something like when the oral mucosa comes in contact with an organism like mucormycosis? Okay. Zygomycosis, mucorales. Mucorales is the genus that causes it. Okay. Or if there is a cut or a trauma in the oral mucous membrane, this microorganism can invade. Okay, so what does the steroids do? It is going to suppress the inflammation. It is going to suppress all the inflammatory cells that are present. So this can probably contribute. I would not say it will definitely happen. It may probably contribute to the development of mucormycosis. But please remember, more than the oral cavity, the mucormycosis can get transmitted through the nasal tract. Okay, so if your mask is not washed, or if some people unfortunately have their favorite mouth mask, which they've been using from several months. So they wash it and use the same thing, and many times it is moist and they don't want to change it. They put it in a plastic cover and store it inside their bags. So if you're going to allow such kind of unhygienic practices, mucormycosis may develop on the mask, and when you put it back next time, you're going to be inhaling this fungal organism through your nasal tract. Okay, so more than oral mucous membrane, mucormycosis is going to get through your nasal tract. So please take adequate precautions. So coming, Sanjay has asked anything about applied aspects of the tongue. So once again, Sanjay, mainly it is to do with vitamin deficiencies and megaloblastic anemia, where the tongue loses its papillae and becomes smooth and shiny. It results in a glossitis or a very painful tongue. Okay. You also have a condition called as macroglossia. In certain syndromes, you see that. Okay. See, there is something called as hairy tongue due to defective desquamation of the filiform papillae. Okay. What happens? The filiform papillae begin to grow, and this presents as something like a brownish, blackish hair-like growth on the tongue, you will see. Okay. So that is one more applied aspect. So the Kulsum has asked, what is the composition of hemidesmosome? So you can read about it more in Orbens and Tenkate. Okay. So it's made up of the attachment components, okay, like laminin, integrin. Okay, you have BP 180, 230, 240, many components are there with stonofibrils. Okay, so Asta Gupta again has asked, how can we treat periodontal pockets? Well, a multitude of periodontal surgeries and gingival procedures are present. Okay, mainly there should be good oral hygiene. Okay, so the reattachment definitely can happen with periodontal therapy. And okay, I will take one last question as we have only 5 minutes left. So I'll just take one last question. So what happens if, Rachna is asking, what happens if stippling is absent in an individual? Nothing to worry. Stippling is always present. It's only lost when there is inflammation of the gingiva. When inflammation of the gingiva is treated, okay, then once the edema recedes, when the edema is gone, the stippling can come back again. Okay. So I hope I've answered all your questions satisfactorily. Thank you.
Yes, there are still incoming questions. So we'll just leave it to you. We will compile all the questions and share with you. If you have time, Dr. Augustine, we would be really highly obliged if you could share the responses of the same as per your convenience.
And I'll give all the answers to them, definitely. I'll do that. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much for your efforts. Thank you for doing this session with us. I'm sure the attendees have gained a lot out of it. Thank you to the participants who have been so patient and sitting through the entire thing, made it more interesting and engaging with their questions. Thank you, everyone. It has been a privilege to host you all. Thank you. Dr. Augustine, anything you would like to add?
Yeah, that is all from my side. Please stay home and stay safe. Yeah.
That is a really good advice. Definitely stay home and stay safe and keep studying, and we'll be happy to host you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.